All right, welcome to Plan 9 Crunch. I'm Doug Gibson, and today we are talking more Ed Wood, and we're with James Pontolillo, who is the author of 2 books on Ed Wood. Oh, hi, James, by the way. Okay, and one of the fun things about Ed Wood the past few years is we've always wanted a biography of him, but now we have 6 or 7 books that almost comprise a biography. And James is probably 2 of the most important. One is called The Unknown War of Edward D. Wood Jr., 1942-1946. The second one is The Muddled Years of Edward D. Wood Jr., 1946-1948. And I think your books probably have, I love all the books I've read, but I think your books have probably brought the most original research out of Wood's life. And you've managed to retract things that even might be painful for us to acknowledge weren't true. So tell us where you're, go on, I'm sorry, go on.
Thank you for that compliment. I think that comes out of in real life, I'm a scientist. So I think my approach to the books is very much informed by a more general outlook on life and just a lifetime practice of getting interested in a topic and wanting to drill down and find the facts that I can and just lay them out, come what may, whether it's something I would like or not.
You know, you are methodical in your research. You're very methodical, and you're not distressed if someone basically tells you to get lost, okay? You still keep going when you're trying to get medical records or Army records or records of where Ed may have lived and things like that. By the way, James lives in Arlington, Virginia right now. We're talking to him there. Tell us a little bit first. I read The Unknown War of Ed Wood. I used to write articles about Wood for my college newspaper and things. And I talk about how he won a Purple Heart and things like that and fought. It wasn't quite like that, but he did have some interesting experiences that would affect him his whole life. The first question I want to ask you though is, was it uncommon for someone 17 years old to enlist in the war? Was it patriotic fervor? Because he hadn't finished high school yet, right?
No, he hadn't. Actually, that's a good question that I didn't specifically look into. Certainly, Ed did need his parents' permission, and we see that in the Marine Corps records. They had an approval form they had to sign for him to join the Marines under the age of 18. My suspicion would be there were a fair number of young men who did that because of patriotic fervor and just the tenor of the times with this sudden attack on the country and everything. When I requested Ed's military records, it was with the thought that, oh yeah, probably he's gussied up the account somewhat, but it'll be relatively accurate. Whereas I found it wasn't accurate. It wasn't accurate at all. And subsequently, it's interesting. I've had other research projects to look into wartime records of other individuals, and what I've actually come across is quite a bit of storytelling. And I think it gets to a more general human thing that you don't want to come back and just say, well, I just moved supplies in a truck the whole war.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, Ed did have
how important that might have been, right?
Yeah, Ed had he had good experiences. I mean, when you were writing about the Gilbert Islands and showed that picture, that would just traumatize me for life if I had to take these dead soldiers and get them off the ground.
Well, that's the thing, While he wasn't involved in the heavy fighting, he was arguably in something worse, which was the cleanup from the heavy fighting.
Yeah.
And just being on those islands that reeked of death for many months afterwards. As I say, there are numerous accounts of how when the troops were finally taken off the islands onto Navy transports, the very first thing that happened on deck was everyone stripped naked and their clothing was burned because they just reeked so badly, and they were then bathed and then given completely new clothing. So, yeah, I have no doubt that what he saw on Tarawa, despite not being involved in the fighting, was horrific in and of itself.
And I'm thinking,
Be otherwise.
and I'm thinking to myself, it would be almost normal for him to feel a sense of camaraderie as being a part of that, okay? And then as time goes on, you just tend to embellish these things sometimes. You might say, "Hey, I was there," and someone might say, "How was the fighting?" And suddenly you're there, but you weren't there for the fighting. I could see how these things happen, perhaps, in his life.
Yeah, and yes, I think it's a very human thing to make the story a little bit more exciting, and it's a slippery slope that you start traveling down.
Yeah.
And then Ed's a creative person to boot, so perhaps there is even more reason to take a bit more license.
It's kind of a pre-internet era, right? Back then.
Well, that's the other thing, with the ability for anyone to check that back then was pretty limited, unlike now.
And it's other contemporaries of his. I don't want to divulge too far, but I was reading interviews and watching interviews with Valda Hansen, for example, where she's saying things that clearly aren't true. All right, but you just kind of have these things. One more thing I wanted. When my father died, I was going through his thing and I saw, it wasn't a certificate like you put, but it was a card saying he was in the Order of Neptune, all right?
Right.
And I didn't know what that was. And then it really was interesting to me when you showed that about Ed, because you crossed the equator, right? My father was in the Navy. But when you talk about the potential hazing, that's how you theorize that Ed might have lost his teeth? You want to expand on that?
Yeah, the hazing, especially back during World War II, could be quite brutal. There was definitely a fun aspect to it and everything, but even up through the 1980s in the U.S. Navy, there were a number of incidents where that kind of equatorial crossing hazing rituals became quite violent at times. And that was a very long tradition. I mean, it goes all the way, those kinds of traditions go back, you can find at least into the 1700s, if not earlier, accounts of hazing rituals.
My father never mentioned that. I only found it in his papers after he died. And now I wish I could have asked him what it might have been like to be in this Order of Neptune, what he might have had to go through. He was in the Korean War, sailing on the USS Rochester. But I just felt a kinship to, hey, I know what he's talking about when you get this thing. And I'm not a military person, so it wouldn't have came to me.
Hopefully his wasn't as bad.
Yeah, I don't think it was, but he just never mentioned it, so it makes me wonder sometimes. There is something else. We all have watched that movie that is called Ed Wood Angora, or something like that. It came out around the time Ed Wood, the movie,
Look
did.
Back in Angora.
Yeah, and of course, Joe Robertson, told the big whopper about, which we all thought was true, Ed Wood was wearing bras and panties. And I long ago, my father didn't care at all about Ed Wood, but I once mentioned to him that thing because I'd read it. And he said, that's impossible. You're too cloistered in the military. And you sort of keep that same conclusion, right?
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the conditions they lived under and the small amount of gear you were allowed, and really it would be your inability to secure that gear, whether you were on board ship or subsequently posted on an island. I can't recall if I think I said it in the book. I could see how maybe he pulled that off after he returned to the Pacific Theater, and he was stationed in the Los Angeles area for the latter part of the war. I could see maybe he had a bus station locker like you could rent back then.
You mentioned that, yes.
And he had a bag in there, and he kept to have a little weekend diversion off somewhere away from the base. But other than that, I can't imagine that it would have been. But of course, fighting off hordes of Japanese while you defend a position wearing bras and panties is a lot more colorful, memorable, also, right?
Yeah, I want to jump back a little bit because one thing I thought was quite poignant. here is Wood about to go off to war, and he decides to go absent without official leave during the holiday season. And you theorize that may have been the fact that he felt he might never come back and see his family again, right?
Yeah, I mean that's that was my thought, that he goes AWOL right before Christmas,
But
and at that point he already knows his unit is going to be shipped to the West Coast, which is then stay. Back then the Marines would get their initial training at Camp Lejeune and Quantico in Virginia, and then they would be shipped to California, and they would get some theater-specific jungle-type training, and then they would finally be sent off to war. So, yeah, he knew he was going right after the holidays, and the only reason I could think why he would have gone AWOL was to, run back up to Poughkeepsie one last time to see the folks and his brother. And one thing I just want to say before I forget is, so that people don't get the wrong impression. I only have the utmost respect for Ed.
Oh,
He
me
was a
too.
very young man, and he made a quite a decision to go off to war at that age. So
That's admirable.
the fact that he comes back and told some tall tales about it, I don't denigrate him for that.
I don't.
It's a very
I don't either. I was interviewing Bill Fleck several weeks ago, and the master of tall tales, and I still love the guy, was Lon Chaney Jr. All right, when it came to things. So I don't think it was uncommon at the time, And getting back, Wood did experience hardship. Okay, he came under light bombing, but bombing when he was a backup patrol. And what is the name? I keep trying to remember this word, but he suffered badly from this. I keep looking.
the elephantiasis.
Yes, but it causes that. But I'm in the muddled years now. Sorry,
Filariasis. Yes, thank
he
you.
suffered badly from that, didn't he?
Yes, and unfortunately, that was the U.S. military made a really bad mistake as far as where they decided to stage people to and from. They staged them to these islands for long stretches of time that had this endemic disease. And there were quite a few soldiers. There were tens of thousands of soldiers who were infected and essentially became war casualties because reinfections could cause very serious symptoms.
You showed some pictures in the book, yeah.
Yeah, once you got infected with it, they at least had the good sense to get you out of the Pacific theater permanently. But that you were basically a casualty that was out of the war at that point, right? These guys were just sent back to California to do office duty and base duty essentially while they recovered. But their wartime service was really over at that point.
Also, in your book, you also convey the danger just of being on a ship trying to go in those areas, right? Where you're constantly under a potential attack from submarines and things like that.
Yeah, and yes, and the standard convoy protocol was that no one was stopping for you.
Yeah, you mentioned the fact that don't fall over because we won't stop, right?
Yeah, no, and there could be 20 ships behind yours and no one is going to stop and pick you up. So, and it would be the same thing if the ship was torpedoed at that point in the war. There wasn't going to be anybody stopping to assist.
So Wood saw a lot of drama in the war. I mean, they may have exaggerated things, but he did experience quite a bit. He experienced things that probably took with him his entire life, particularly seeing all the dead soldiers there on that island and everything, and dealing with a very painful disease that you really didn't have a cure for, right, at that time period.
No, it's in your body permanently, and if you have other stresses in your life, it could cause you to have attacks of it later throughout your life. So it was really sort of important to just keep yourself in good health so that you wouldn't sort of prompt its reappearance.
It made me wonder when I was reading that, did that have anything to do with his death in 1978? I mean, it's certainly not on the death certificate or anything. I just wonder.
Yeah, I don't know if it could have contributed to the heart disease he had or anything. You don't know. It's a parasite that's in your body permanently.
Yeah.
and that's dormant for long periods, and then
How good a marksman was Ed Wood, in your opinion?
so he well, that's an interesting thing because he met the basic standard you had to pass and become a Marine infantryman, but he wasn't up, in the upper levels. He was in the
Mid levels, yeah.
he was right in the mid level where most people were, which was a pretty good marksman. Um, the Marines got more extensive firearms training than members of the Army at that time. So your average Marine was probably a much better shot than your average U.S. Army infantryman.
Oh, go on. I'm sorry.
But I'd have to look again. I think he was a Marine sharpshooter, is what they called it, which sounds a bit more impressive than what it actually denotes at the time.
Well, we'll talk more about the second book, but he was touting his sharp shooting skills, I think, when he came to Hollywood. Now, he had a really good talent of typing, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, he was a phenomenal typist by all accounts. And certainly when you look at what he poured out between the early 60s and the mid 70s, I think we'd all like to have at least 40 or 50 or more novels, who knows, and countless short stories.
He gets good marks constantly from his superiors when he is a clerk typist in the Army.
Oh yes, his accuracy and yes, he was well regarded by the commanding. He generally worked as part of a headquarters staff, and he always got very high marks from any of the officers that he was serving in an administrative capacity.
Now, what I find interesting is, of course, he got sick in the Pacific, but he also had a problem that many soldiers have. He caught VD, didn't he, while he was in Southern California?
Yes, yeah. Once he got back from the Pacific, and he was just in LA.
I'm not condemning him, but this probably is pretty common, right?
Well, yeah, there were a lot of good time girls around, and the Army certainly cautioned everyone about that, and they handed out plenty of prophylactics and had all sorts of lectures and things about how to protect yourself. But like everything else in life, nothing's perfect, and Ed, came down with syphilis, and luckily for him, it was at a time where penicillin could just knock that right out. So it was something that I hate to put it that way. In a way, syphilis hadn't evolved to start making itself more difficult to medical treatment as it is today. So Ed at least was lucky to catch a dose when it was easily treatable and curable.
I grew up in Long Beach, California, so it's interesting for me to find out he was in the hospital in Long Beach for a while, and also that he performed potentially in Long Beach when he first came to Hollywood to try to become an entertainment person. I want to ask you one more thing. I found it very fascinating to read the local newspaper reports of Wood, from being in basic training, from being wounded and things like that. And I'm just wondering, I'm a newspaper editor, retired, but it seems to me that the newspapers would keep pretty close track of the local boys who were out during World War II and things like that, right?
Yeah, you can find a lot of accounts of if anyone's ever doing any research on somebody, they should definitely check all the local papers, because at that time you will find lots of snippets about people heading out, even once they're overseas, what the family may be reporting back about what they're hearing, where their loved one is, to the limited degree they got information about that. And then certainly anytime they're on leave. So it can help you reconstruct what, that portion of an individual's life.
Yeah, and it's
a level of coverage of individuals you don't see in newspapers anymore.
No, and I was about to say that, because when I was growing up early in newspapers, the idea was for a local paper, particularly a small one, get everyone in the paper at some point. Of course,
Okay.
today you're lucky if you have 8 pages in a mid-sized daily newspaper now every day. But I
I'm
really,
guessing it died in the 70s, maybe, because I know in the early 60s at one point when we moved into this one town in New Jersey, the local paper actually had a little blurb about our family moving in
yeah, those
last,
days,
you know.
those days are gone. It's really sort of sad. But what was the last? Okay, Wood stayed active after the war when he went back. He was involved in the veterans associations and things like that. Correct?
Yeah, he was involved with the Marine Corps League, and I'm not and with the VFW, but more with the Marine Corps League. I like I said, I only traced my books only trace him up through 48, so I can't say how active he was after that.
But initially he was. He
Oh
sort of,
yes, definitely. He came back and immediately was active and was a chaplain with the Marine Corps League
yeah.
and went to its went to its state convention in New York and its national convention in Atlantic City, all pretty uh, fast upon his return.
When do you think he started writing a lot in the military? Because he created Casual Company, a play during that time, right?
Yes, I'm not sure about that because he did write Casual Company along with a co-author, although at one point it really became just his own work. And you don't see reference. I can't remember the gentleman's name now, but he sort of drops out of it pretty quickly.
It,
And certainly when Ed was back in 1946 in Poughkeepsie after the war, he makes reference to a novel, The Inconsiderate Corpse.
yeah, yeah.
That who knows what that's a reference to? We're not. I don't think anyone's really sure. Um, as someone who wrote a bunch of stuff as a young man that he subsequently destroyed, um, maybe that's something Ed just ended up destroying because he was unhappy with, or he repurposed it into other writings. We it's hard to say.
We know he was a prolific writer. All you have to see is
Yeah.
from 60s, 50s, 70s. I think I read somewhere long ago, but I couldn't give you the source, that Ed claimed to have written stories as a child to publications.
So I've done some searching. He said his first publication was at age 12
Yeah, that's what I heard it. Yeah.
for I want to say it was Street and Smith's detective stories.
That's what I'm thinking too, but is it true? I mean, I just wondering.
And well, I went and I searched. I said, okay, well, if he did it when he was age 12, that would have been this time period. And there are indexes available online. And I searched through all the relevant years and couldn't see anything that looked like it might have been his. But who knows? Maybe he misremembered when he said it was
Yeah.
a Street and Smith publication. And I
Could-
have not I have not made the effort yet to look through all the indices
That would take a long time.
for all the magazines that are available online to see in the hope that I find that one little piece of straw sticking up.
It's telling though that he said when he left the army, "I want to go to Hollywood and become a writer." Right? He said.
Yes, I mean, yeah, that was really clearly set in his mind that when the Marines asked him what his plans after the war were, Hollywood to become a writer.
So
Yeah.
I just wonder if writing all day and also putting out Casual Company filled him with enthusiasm for this, to try to do this stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure he spent some of his office time during the war. I got the letters for the colonel done that he asked me to do, and now I'll just spend some time pecking away at this novel I'm working on or whatever, right?
Yeah, it's okay. I'm gonna sort of move into the second book now. But he goes home,
Okay.
and then he decides to go to Washington D.C., where for a short time he takes a class. I don't know. It seems like a prestigious place he was at. Tell us about his training in Washington D.C. with acting.
Yeah, so Ed got back from the war in May '46 in Poughkeepsie, and he was in Poughkeepsie until late January of '47.
I should have
And
mentioned something. He was an MC and may have done some work there, right, in Poughkeepsie?
yeah, so that time in Poughkeepsie from May '46 to January '47, He did some entertaining at the Dells Inn, and in fact, he was the MC of their New Year's Eve celebration. He also claimed that he did, it might be, he did a sweater girl act and some other things he claimed at some various clubs in upstate New York and in New York City, some transvestite clubs on the Lower East Side. And then at the end of January 47, he went down to the Kingsmith School for Creative Arts in Washington, D.C., which the Kingsmith School originally was a finishing school for young women. And then at the start of the Second World War, the government pressed a lot of really specialized schools to widen their educational offerings as part of the war effort. So the Kingsmith School added all sorts of things that they didn't have before, like drafting and secretarial skills and things like that. And then seeing both a decline in their the rich families, quite frankly, that wanted to send their daughters to a finishing school, and seeing the GI Bill looming on the horizon, the Kingsmith School expanded its arts program and actually attracted some very talented people at the time to come and teach at the school. And so Ed went down to the Kingsmith School, and on, you know, looking at one of his resumes from the early 50s, a number of the plays that he said he were in were put on by the Kingsmith's drama program. So it's clear he was in the drama program for one term from the start of February 47 until the mid-June of 47. He was
Go on, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he was definitely in their drama program. He might have taken other courses in their literature program, but those records don't exist. So we can't say one way or another.
Makes me wonder if he wanted to be an actor originally for a while.
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Certainly, as I note in my book, the Kingsmith School was almost unique at the time in the degree to which it allowed the students to participate in the productions. Mm-hmm. And so whatever cause, you know, we don't know why Ed chose Kingsmith or how he became aware of it, but it was certainly a very wise choice to go there, because it gave him the opportunity to both act on stage, despite the fact that he had very limited experience, and be involved in every level of a play's production. And so
I wonder if his GI Bill might have paid for it. I have no idea.
I suspect it would have. There was definitely a provision for the GI Bill to pay for that schooling. Now, it's interesting because in his book, Hollywood Rat Race, he has some negative things to say about drama school teachers and other similar instructors. So maybe he didn't feel that he got enough out of that, and that's why he left after a term. It's sort of hard to say. But I mean, I think it was probably quite formative, because, as I said, he was exposed to people who either were already accomplished or who were rising stars at the time, his instructors.
Yeah, I remember. I can't remember the names now, but was it Patricia Neal one? Maybe I can't remember.
Horton Foote.
That's the name.
Celebrated American playwright. Was the main instructor for the drama program. Mm-hmm. So, and even at the time, at that time, Horton Foote was already a known Hollywood writer and a celebrated New York playwright. So it's very interesting, because Ed, for a short period, found himself in a very dynamic part of American dramatics.
You know, it's funny. We don't know much about his trip from D.C. to Los Angeles. You have some hypothesizing in it of where he might have done and things like that. What are your ideas about that trip from D.C. to Los Angeles?
Yeah, that was the thing that really bugged me, because I'm really anal, Doug, and I wanted to have a complete narrative without any gaps. But unfortunately, from when he left Kingsmith in mid-June until about early September, we have a gap of not really knowing what he was doing. Now, of course, during the course of his life, Ed told quite a few. So
Carnival,
when,
Carnival, right?
yeah. Well, backing up for just a second, like from when Ed returned home from the military in May 46 to when he shows up in Hollywood in, say, September of 48, over the course of his life, Ed told enough stories about what he did during that time period to probably fill a decade's worth of activities. So, but yeah, I suspect that my suspicion is that he spent that part of the summer from June to September with a carnival on the east coast of the U.S. And he certainly told some tales about that over the years.
Well, what I like about your book is even if you can't verify that he was in these clubs or in the carnival based on all your research, you give us an idea of what life was like in those clubs or in the carnival of that time period, the late 40s. It's very interesting to read quite a bit.
Well, thanks. I mean, that was really my goal was, if all I wrote was the very bare facts that I was able to find, well, that I think would have been about a 5-page book. So really, it was trying to set Ed in the context of the time and try to give the reader a feel for what that was like.
Oh, and you do that. You surprised me about how decadent Washington D.C. and Los Angeles was in that time period. Okay.
I surprised myself when I found out how decadent Washington D.C. was. I mean, right? People don't think Washington D.C. 1947, within 6 blocks of the White House, practically countless gay nightclubs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is not a picture most people have of any American city of that time period.
It was fascinating, learning that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, New York City, Los Angeles, very big transvestite scene in the 40s when Ed arrives. So yeah, I mean, I think this is probably going to be a surprise for lots of readers, but I think that's what I found sort of most interesting was, beyond narrating what I thought Ed was going to doing was putting him in the context of the time, sort of a more realistic view of what was going on, not necessarily the sort of the rosy mistaken views we often have about what life was back then.
Yeah, it's a good
point.
It
was a lot more complicated than people
think. Yeah,
they just didn't talk about it.
Well, I think life is definitely R-rated. So the thing is that Ed gets there. For a while, he lives with a family, but you haven't been able to find much information about that, right?
No, the Aldrich family, and I did reach out to all the surviving members, but there's really no records surviving from back then. There was some unrelated to Ed. There was some family strife that caused some splitting in the family and subsequent loss of records and disengagement between individuals. So I had this fantasy going that somebody was going to send me a photo of Ed, at one of the families, like here's Ed the boarder at Thanksgiving 1948 dinner with Mr. and Mrs. Aldrich. I was really looking forward to a photo of like that turning up, because that would have been like the first photo of Ed in Hollywood.
Well, you remember, I remember reading about your excitement when you get the military records for the first time.
Right.
And then the fact, well, you're a little disappointed, but at least you got the story, more or less. And it's just,
there ended up, and that's the thing is, right, there ended up being a very interesting story there nonetheless. It just wasn't the one we were expecting.
Yeah. So Ed gets a job immediately at a store I went to many times as a kid called the Broadway. He seems to do a smart thing. He went and got a job, okay, because it's probably hard to break into Hollywood. But he seems to get at least a toe in there, doesn't he, with some kind of work, and basically probably just picking up whatever theater gigs he can get, right? Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, he got some small theater gigs initially. My brain is going here. Don't
Well,
mind me.
The Blackguard is one, right? Peg of My Heart.
Blackguard is one. He was in some other small, like one-off or a couple of night productions at other local theaters. After working at the Broadway department store, the Hollywood Broadway department store, he got a job at Bell International Pictures, which again was probably a very formative event for him because it was a small studio where again, despite what his job title might have been, he was probably, from
Everything.
all accounts I could find, everybody there was working on all aspects of the productions that were going on because it was a very small house, if you will, the studio, just a handful of people. So that was probably another really good learning opportunity for Ed, where he got to see a small studio in action and everything that goes on to make a small industrial film or whatever.
I was fascinated that he could get a job like that because it seemed like an ideal one for him just going out there. He must have thought, wow, I've gotten a great job here with Bell International Pictures. Now,
Yeah, and unfortunately, Bell, when Ed arrived in Hollywood at a time when the movie industry was actually had been undergoing contraction that was going to continue, and Bell, as one of the smaller fish, eventually, folded up shop because it just was not economically viable anymore, and so Ed lost that job. But
well, it happens, sometimes the best jobs you have are the ones that don't last. But the Blackguard, he met a man who probably placed, named Don Nagel, who had a big
right.
part in his life. And of course, you mentioned that the press tried to make it look like they were army buddies, but that's probably
So the local newspaper reports Ed and Don winning parts in the Blackguard, and recounts this tale of how they met in the European theater during World War II.
European theater.
Yeah, which of course Eddie was never there. Don, I can't recall the exact date, but Don basically he got into the military late in 45.
Yeah, you told me that, 45, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, who knows where that story came from. I thought, is this Ed coming up with, was this Ed's fanciful imagining that he told the press that day?
I just imagine Ed and Don saying, let's get this to the press. It'll be a great story. I don't know. It's awesome.
Yeah. Because it's the coincidence of the two wartime buddies accidentally running into each other again at this casting call.
Boy, I wish when I talk with friends, they ask, what would you do if you went back in time? And I'm saying, I'd go see Ed Wood in the Blackguard if I could do that, He's such a lot of fun to see that kind of stuff. And then he was in Peg, and Chuck LaBerge, right, was another big impact in his life early.
Yeah. Well, the Blackguard, by all, it ran for about 7 or 8 seasons the first time before it finally closed down. And certainly through the first 4 or 5 seasons, it got very good reviews for what it was. Mm-hmm. Which was just sort of your lighthearted dinner theater with a bunch of audience participation and off-color humor and quite a bit of repartee with the audience. So,
and Ed Wood played
one night out.
He played a foolish sheriff in it, right?
Yes.
Because that photo is ubiquitous now. I've seen it so often of him, with the fake mustache and everything. And I don't want to miss anything we talked about, but I'm going to go on to John. Well, we still want to talk about the Badersky brothers, although they weren't called Badersky back then. But let's talk about John Crawford Thomas, who's only 18 years old, but gets a lead or big portrayal in the Blackguard, right?
Yes, he came in the summer of 1948, as best as I can tell, sometime after July. And got the lead role as the villain, and played that for some indeterminate period. The local papers had quite extensive coverage of the Blackguard cast changes and everything right up until about 1948, and then it tailed off. That kind of coverage tailed off severely. So, sort of the period actually right before Ed gets involved, we've got much better ideas of the cast changes and things like that. But certainly Ed and John Crawford Thomas, met through their involvement in the Blackguard, and then depending on which account we want to believe, Ed either talked Crawford John Thomas, excuse me, into going into some ventures with him, or Ed mildly swindled Crawford John Thomas out of his inheritance. Certainly, C.J. Thomas was quite embittered with Ed for a number of years.
Yeah, I watched that documentary about 20 years ago. I should watch it again. It just seems like I just think it was a venture that was overly optimistic on both parts, more or less.
Well, Ed never suffered from a deficit of optimism.
Yeah, and I've watched the movie. It came out, and I guess you're right. They got 23 minutes done, and it was over. Right? They ran out of money.
Yeah, and I think in a situation like that, it might be easy to walk away and blame the other guy, right? I mean, certainly if Crawford John Thomas's family had wanted to know what happened with his inheritance, it would be much easier to say, well, I got taken by this Sharpie, rather than, well, me and this other guy made some bad decisions and it just didn't work out, But he certainly that was the end of his Hollywood involvement until the Ed Wood Renaissance.
Yeah, that's true.
When he sort of reappeared on the scene.
Ed Wood made his first film for Conrad, Theodore, and Henry, and I don't know how to pronounce their name at the time, but Conrad became Brooks, and Henry became Badesky. And it was Range Rover, which is the movie he got $60 to make, because the brothers, I guess Henry wrote it or something, all right? And it's I saw it because I managed to get my hands on that movie, what's it called? That has
Hellborn.
Hellborn. I managed to get my hands on a copy of Hellborn. And it is overshot. So was this a matter of Ed was learning how to do things probably at that time?
Well, I think it was learning how to do things. I think part of it was on his first few films, small films, he was buying, what he could get at low cost, which was World War II surplus.
So you keep saying that surplus,
film stock, which was poor quality film stock. So it is what it is.
I'll try to understand. When I was an editor, I would have people who would be so sure of themselves that they'd try to do things on their own, okay? And sometimes it would work out, and sometimes it wouldn't. And you talked about Ed being overly optimistic, and I wonder if that's one of the issues he had in those early days. You can admire the idealism, but unfortunately we live in the real world sometimes, right?
Right. Well, and so it brings me back to the movie Ed Wood's portrayal of him, right?
Yeah.
This is the worst movie I've ever seen. Well, my next one will be better.
That's a good point.
Right?
Yeah.
I love that line. And, as Ed Wood fans, when you look at something like Range Revenge, the way I look at it is, I try to be neither overly critical of it, but nor do I view it as like a holy relic because it's the first
thing he ever did, right?
Footage we have of his that he created, right? I think we can find a happy medium in there.
I think you're right too. What's interesting is the scenes of him directing, where he drops to the ground and shows all his enthusiasm. That's far better shot, and it really captures what the idealism and the enthusiasm he may have had that made him, be a magnet to people, perhaps.
Right. Well, yeah, certainly. I think for me, seeing him on those film segments is more interesting than the rest of the film, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, definitely.
Because we have very little footage of him. Um, so
Yeah, I was Conrad Brooks actually. You know, I look when I watch TCM a lot, and I
right,
try if I see a film Conrad Brooks might be in, I look for him because it's usually as a background actor or anything up. And I was surprised to find out that Henry was 20. Was he 20 or 10 or 20 years older than Conrad? That was an odd.
yes,
You know, funny thing is, I won't blame you if you've never seen this movie, but Henry is actually in Female Trouble, a John Waters film.
oh yeah, I saw that a long time ago.
Yeah, and it sort of blew my mind when I saw it, found out that he was in it. When you're in cult movies, Andy Milligan, John Waters, Herschel Gordon Lewis, Ed Wood, they're all, you go through all of them. So tell me a little
Well,
bit. Oh, go on, go on.
yeah, and yeah, that's right. I have to blame the Medved brothers for all of that, because then after that it was what it was. There was an issue of Research magazine called Incredibly Strange
I
Movies.
know, I never got a hand of that. I did get some pages printed for me sometime. Yeah.
And that one really then launched me down the rabbit hole of watching all sorts of
Oh, me too. Me
movies
too.
to annoy those around me.
I got hooked. Hey, did you ever read Danny Perry's books, cult movies?
Oh yes,
I
I've
got all
those.
three of them. Yeah.
Yep.
And then there's a guy named John Towson who recently publishing some a little more esoteric and probably, I don't want to say this because Perry's a very smart man, but a little more, how do I say it without, just a little more introspective, put it that way. To the point where I think Perry's actually might even be a little more entertaining to read, okay? But and TCM came out with an Underground series. Do you ever watch that?
Yes.
And they came out with a booklet of 50 films a few years ago, and guess what Paramount did? And they canceled TCM Underground right after this. Unfortunate, you know. I want to ask you a few things now. Is there anything you think I missed about these books? And I want to go a little farther into Edward's life.
No, but the only thing I would say is, if nothing else, I hope maybe they move other people to look into some of the other poorly documented aspects, sections of Ed's life, because there's certainly plenty of room out there for people to delve into and try to fill in the many gaps.
Okay, I missed one part. I want to talk a little bit about Casual Company. Okay, and Johnny Depp, you see Dolores Fuller performing in it, which didn't happen obviously in the Johnny Depp movie. But I've always been interested in the Susie and the two sisters.
Jeanette.
Jeanette, yeah, because they're in this play that didn't get very good reviews, didn't last very long. You mentioned they had thought they might have a long turn. That never happened. But if you go back in time, you see this movie, you've seen Night of the Ghouls, of course.
Yes.
And you've probably seen, because they found it, the entire Final Curtain.
Right.
Well, one of those girls is in that movie, all right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting to me that she was involved almost a decade later, but she was in nothing before that. And I wonder, were they friends, did he call her and say, hey, listen?
Yeah. So I did a quasi biography on her, from what I could find, that showed up on Joe Blevins' Ed Wood Wednesday.
Yeah, I'll have to go look for that because I usually read everything on that thing.
And so I go into her background from high school all the way through the early '60s. What I was able to find as far as what various productions she was in, and the tale that's told is that she and her sister were working in a local donut shop when either Ed or someone from the production discovered them, quote unquote, and then talked with they were, I want to say they were 17 and 15 at the time, if I remember correctly, and then Ed spoke with their mom and got the approval for them to be in this production and everything, and that was the connection.
I think I may have read that several years ago, or maybe a few years ago. But the thing is, like I've got Ed Wood minutiae in my mind. Okay, it burrs, and I'm convinced that there's a movie out there called The Night the Banshee Cried that we haven't found yet. I really do, because it just doesn't match with what you see in Night of the Ghouls when you have to have Ed Wood dressed up, attacking the people. And just this is the kind of part where I think, I don't know, you've done so much already, but it would be interesting to know Ed Wood, the details of Ed Wood between Plan 9 and making Night of the Ghouls. This whole effort with this, and Joe Blevins did a thing on this Major Somebody. It'd be interesting to find out more about how that went up and didn't work, because you get tantalizing details. Like Marge Usher in the Rudolph Gray book talks about how Ed disappointed her a lot of times by not following through on things. And if you read the Rudolph Gray book, apparently he was trying to keep Night of the Ghouls going, and then I don't believe he ever didn't have access to it if he wanted it. That's what I'm trying to say. He may have just given up on the book, on the movie. And then I think of the time that might be the most fertile is what was Ed Wood doing when he was making films for the industrial company, for the government also.
Right.
And when he was writing press releases or speeches for Sam Yorty. Those are fascinating, still untapped areas. The time between Sinister Urge and going to Stephen Apostolov.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't some lost film work out there. Certainly, when you look at Ed's later writing career, right, we've got lost writings, or that will hopefully turn up someday. Although the nature of the sort of the sleaze novel industry was such that this is throwaway literature. And probably the vast majority of those books that were ever printed have long since hit landfills. So, but yeah, for that kind of reason, I wouldn't be surprised if everybody just keeps plugging away and keeps their eyes out. Who knows what might turn up?
Well, because of books like yours, and books by Angel, and books by Bob Blackburn, and books by Joe Blevins, and books by Paul Apple. All these books have come out, and we're finding a sort of a structure of his life, but there's still these isolated areas that might be interesting to find out. Bob Kramer told me there's absolutely no copy of Bela Lugosi post-mortem out there, right? And he talks to the Lugosi family, but I'd sure love to see that. That'd be interesting too if Ed wrote that.
Yeah, I guess the optimist in me wants to never say never. There isn't one, right, until suddenly one turns up by some totally bizarre circumstance that someone had a copy somehow. We can only hope for that.
It'd be great. What's your favorite Ed Wood movie?
I like Night of the Ghouls. I would put Night of the Ghouls at number one, just because of the seance sequences.
Isn't it great? Isn't it fantastic?
That are sort of so offbeat, but yet they are informed by the kinds of things that actually went on at seances. So
yeah, that's the movie I watch most now, probably. I don't know if I'd put it above Plan 9, but every time I see it, it gets better. And I was able to get that Canadian release before they stopped releasing it, and that was fun to have earlier this year, the Blu-ray.
Although I have to say, in one way, I got the greatest enjoyment out of Orgy of the Dead, and that is that many years ago, two of my nephews went picking through my movie collection when I wasn't there and saw Orgy of the Dead and thought they had found something really spicy, And I walked in on them sitting there, just absolutely dumbfounded looking, because they could not understand what it was they were watching.
Well, that can turn you off nudity, all right? Which is a weird thing to say, but that movie is just so long and boring. I had an opportunity to do some work on Stephen Apostolillo, who had a very fascinating life, that more or less. And I noticed that a lot of Ed Wood's stuff, even before they met, crossed with Stephen Apostolillo. Like William, what's his producer's? what's his cinematographer's name? Big.
William C. Thompson.
Yeah, William C. Thompson made Journey to Freedom. Tor
Right.
Johnson was in Journey to Freedom. So a lot of these, with lack of a better term, one lung productions had a lot of the same people in them. And I was impressed going back to that movie he made with Crawford John Thomas. Didn't that have some names in it, like that from the '40s and things like that? It just didn't get finished or something.
Yeah, I can't recall off the top of my head, but yes, he had some. There were some minor. It was not a cast of. It was not a cast of unknowns.
Yeah.
There were some minor actors in there.
I loved I loved the fact that you would show the scenes of the streets and the offices in the 1940s and show what they look like today in some areas. All right, the monogram one, seeing those monogram studios where Wood and Crawford John Thomas had offices, and seeing what it is today, it's kind of sad, but I love those monogram films. They're just a treasure. Everything like
Yeah,
that.
that's one of the things that I always fault books for, are not enough photos, and I really do like to do that. I really, anytime I see a reference back in time to a place, I'm always like, well, what does that look like today?
Oh, yeah.
I'm always going right to Google Maps
I
to go see what's there now. Does that building still exist? Is it still recognizable? So
that's
yeah,
that's a good point. I was in Hungary in 2023, and I tried to find out where Lugosi went in Budapest and other places, and the big theater was right at the edge of a bridge now. It's no longer there, but at least I could visualize he was there. Another place was now a subway entrance, but this is where Lugosi performed. So it's a lot of fun. You're right. I can totally empathize with that.
if I can keep myself on course, since you mentioned William C. Thompson, if I can keep myself on course, I'm hoping to have a book out about him by the end of 2027.
Wow, thanks for telling us that. That'll be a must
I've
read.
been doing a lot of research into his life, and I've been in contact with. He doesn't have any direct surviving family members, but I've been in contact with his heirs and have a bunch of photos from them that I have either not been seen before or very little seen. So I'm hoping to, in the next 2 years, have a nicely illustrated,
That'd be fantastic.
about the same kind of thing, as the 2 Ed Wood books I've already done, probably about that size.
I love the size of this book. It reminds me of the Golden Turkey Awards size and things like that. So it's really a joy to read.
That's solely, again, because of my obsession with photos and maps and things. I want them to be legible.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided I'm going to just go with the sort of a standard 8.5 by 11, so I can make pictures nice and big, and
Did William C. Thompson, now you may not know this or may not want to tell me, was he really colorblind?
Yes, all the accounts was that he was colorblind.
Okay.
Just a few things I can throw out is he went to Yale University. He was quite an accomplished chemist as a college student. In fact, he won an award from the American Chemical Society for chemical advances on developing film emulsions. Wow. So and then he went right off from Yale into the silent movie era and shot quite a few silent movies. So he's got an interesting career beyond what I think most people know about him. Lots of people within the Ed Wood world know about him because of the connection, and I just felt that he deserved to have his story told.
I completely agree, and we'll have you on when that book comes out, because I want to talk about that. He was, like you said, from the silent era, right? He started his career and everything. Well, let's see. Anything of Ed Wood's life post 65 you think we're missing? Because the only movie I've ever watched is Take It Out and Trade.
Right.
And to me, that's just a hard R. Okay. But Wood was still writing. I mean, still putting out. I've read everything that Bob Blackburn's gotten out there. I love this title because about 10, 15 years ago, I bought A Muddled Mind or something of the book that came out. I don't think it's in print anymore. But what is there any? I think people were shocked when we found out that Ed Wood wrote a screenplay for a Notre Dame football coach. I just wonder if there's any more surprises out there from late in his life.
Well, so there was certainly a novel that was found recently,
Oh, I saw it, but I can't remember the title of that. What was it again?
Saving Grace.
Yeah, Saving Grace. And that's for
And
sale, I believe, actually.
yeah. And certainly when you look at Ed's resume, he lists other novels that are not assignable to anything else that we're currently aware of. So um, the suspicion is there's at least a handful, if not more than that, novels out there that he wrote that have yet to surface. Um, and then you have things like well, just one second, I have to stand up off
Sure,
camera to.
sure.
And then you have things like this that happened, which was just a few weeks ago. There was someone on eBay who listed a whole swath of books for $1,600 that they claimed were by Ed Wood, and there were definitely Ed Woods in there. There were some that have been claimed but not proven, and then there were some that no one has ever claimed these are by Ed before. And I'll bring these two up. There's and the author is Helene Morgan, and there was the Rape,
Rape
Club,
Club.
and Killer Dyke.
Killer Dyke. So they sound like things Ed might have written back then.
And this is a sign of an Ed Wood illness. That's someone you don't even know makes the claim they're by Ed, and you quickly go out and get copies so you can try to evaluate.
Well,
that.
didn't the late Greg Javer or Joe Blevins have a whole thing where they opened up a bunch of books they bought around that
Yeah.
era about 2 or 3, 4 years ago? I think I watched it on YouTube or something.
So who knows what the basis for this claim is, but eventually I'll have to get to these, and there'll be an Ed Wood Wednesday out of that. But
Yeah,
it gets to the whole thing of there's still some Eds out there we need to find, and we don't know how many. And maybe we'll find them one day.
I saw an Ed Wood book in a New York City books. I used to live in Boston in the 90s. It was like $50, and I should have bought it. But what can you say? Okay.
Oh, now if you want to talk time machine,
Yeah.
I would take a time machine back to like some disreputable bookstores in Los Angeles and New York, and I would just be buying shelf loads of.
Oh yeah, going to. Well, they had something in I can't remember what it's called in New York, but they had something called Acres of Books in Long Beach that I used to haunt. But a lot of those places are gone. When I was in 8th grade, I wrote a biography of Bela Lugosi. And I bought the Kramer book, and I bought the Lenig book, all right? And I was fascinated by Ed Wood. And this was 1977. And I was going to call him. Now, Angel Scott says he wasn't in the phone book. And maybe it was wrong, but I saw an Ed Wood in there, right? I thought I saw a D. But then last second I said, nah, I have enough information. I'm 13 years old, okay?
Right.
But sometimes like moments, But, what you're doing, what other people are doing, is just so much fun to find out, because in a person like Ed Wood or even Andy Milligan or somebody else, there's so much to find out about these people.
Well, and this is the time to do it. I could not have, without the ever increasing amount of digital resources that are available through the internet. I couldn't have done the 2 books that I've done on Ed Wood 10, 15, 20 years ago. The ability to scoop up large amounts of newspapers and search through them relatively easily compared to what you'd have to do in the past just really makes this kind of research so much easier now. So it's that terrible dynamic of it would have been better to be around in the 60s and 70s and talk with Ed directly, extensively, right? But we can't do that. But now we've got tools that at least will allow us to search all sorts of supporting materials for traces of him.
And it's fascinating. Joe Blevins made a joke when I talked to him last year. He said if they wanted to make a movie on Ed Wood's final decade, Johnny Depp could play it. Okay. He looks like it now. He might have. I doubt that's in anybody's Hollywood planning. Well, anyways, I want to thank you, Mr. Pontolillo. Thank you very much. This has been a lot of fun. I think I enjoy almost more than anything else talking Ed Wood with people on the podcast.
Oh, this has been great, Doug. I really enjoyed this.
Great. And so I'm just going to say what I say at the end. We're Plan 9 Crunch. You can subscribe to us at YouTube. You can follow or like us on Plan 9 Crunch podcast and blog at Facebook. We're on TikTok, although I don't do a lot of stuff on TikTok, but we do have a presence there. And plan9crunch.com is our traditional blog I started with Steve D. Stones, who is a co-blogger of mine and occasionally shows up on the podcast. So thank you very much, and that's a wrap.